Hey, Kianga, you're on mute.
Wow, what a great way to kick off the webinar. Good morning, everyone. Let me start over. I'm Kianga Dabrington. I'm managing partner of Acre of America Partners, and so pleased to host today's webinar on opportunity zone investing in the Hudson Valley, and specifically to present the work of Regenerate Hudson Opportunity Zone Fund, which is the brainchild of Chris Lindstrom, who is going to really kick us off here and talk about his inspiration for launching the Opportunity Zone Fund, and also Regenerate Hudson, the broader vision that connects with his work in regenerative economies. Before I hand it over to Chris, I just want to give an overview of today's program. I'm here in Hudson. I think all of us who are going to be speaking to you today are coming from Hudson and have been a part of the work, the investment work that the Opportunity Zone Fund has done since launching in December of 2020. And so I'll introduce all of our panelists in a moment, but let me just share my screen and give everyone an overview of what we're going to be covering in the next 2 hours. So I'm here just to give a brief welcome, and then we'll have Chris give some comments. And I'll come back and speak a little bit more about Acre of America Partners, who we are and our story, and say a few words about opportunity zone investing. You know, this webinar isn't, you're not going to go into tons of detail about the program itself. I'm sure many of you participating today are familiar, but I will give an overview of what it is. And then we're going to hear from Ian and Alex, Farm Ferments, a really fantastic business, opportunity zone business located here in Hudson. And Sean and Gabriel will speak about a really exciting real estate development project happening. I'll talk about some venture work we're doing here at Acre of Americas in the blockchain space. And we'll have a bit of a conversation, and that will take us to noon. So with that, love to hand it over to you, Chris, to talk about Regenerate Hudson and your inspiration for organizing this Opportunity Zone Fund and investing here in Hudson.
Wow, thank you, Kianga. This is really exciting. So Regenerate Hudson was first founded about a year and a half ago is when I first incorporated Regenerate Hudson. But I would say the inspiration really goes all the way back to the early 2000s when I started working for the Schumacher Society, which is a nonprofit think tank in Western Massachusetts that is dedicated to promoting the ideas and the life work of E.F. Schumacher, who's sort of the godfather of localization and the whole meme of small is beautiful, the idea that that you don't have to, that big is not necessarily bigger or better. and that really instilled an appreciation in me and a passion for really devoting my time and my resources towards the regeneration and the restoration of local economies. And so Regenerate Hudson is very much been born in that spirit. I did first move to the Hudson Valley in 2003. I lived in Claverack for about half a year, and then Hillsdale for a little while. But it wasn't until 2014 that I came to live in Hudson pretty much full time for the last, well, really since then, except I've moved to Craryville back in March. But my heart is still very much in Hudson. I have 2 properties there. I still own a residential home, but I have also recently bought a church property on North 6, which I am in the process of relaunching as a music studio and event space. The Regenerative Hudson really came out of the desire to create a model, an example for people such as myself who are interested in taking their money out of Wall Street and out of the corporate economy and putting it back into Main Street. And more specifically, putting it into businesses and real estate projects that were really focused on this idea of regeneration, which is really the idea that in order to heal the planet right now, we have to actually start moving our capital into things that, into an economy that is, that has the overall wellness of the planet and human beings built into the core of its nucleus, of its DNA. Whereas right now, our economic system has largely been built on this principle of extraction. As long as we are operating within an economy that is built on extraction, we're never going to be able to heal the humanity as well as the biosphere from what's happening right now, which is a very rapid and kind of frightening degradation of life on this planet. So I believe that investing in local economies, specifically with and local businesses that are aligned with the values of ecological regeneration and social equity, is part of the solution. And so I decided to start Regenerate Hudson to really put my money where my mouth is. And so what we are unveiling today is the seed of the Regenerate Hudson portfolio, which is ultimately will be made up of businesses and real estate projects that are looking at uplifting the whole community of Hudson, focusing on green building, and on regenerative businesses that are built and founded on an ethos of looking to create this harmonization between people and planet. So I'm really excited by who we have, who are going to be kicking off this inaugural webinar, and I'm extremely excited by what is going to be made possible by this Opportunity Zone Fund. I will say a little bit about that I do believe opportunity zones, while are not perfect, they do offer an incentive, to move money out of Wall Street and into local economies, and I do, and so I am interested in the role that the Opportunity Zone program can play in furthering the mission of Regenerate Hudson. Hudson, of course, is an opportunity zone, and but it is one of many throughout the Hudson Valley, including Kingston, and these are all cities that are that I think can set an example of moving this opportunity zone money into values aligned, regenerative, resilient economic systems. And so what I'm hoping to do is to create a model where we can demonstrate that we can have a transformative effect on local economies through a intentional and methodical way of investing into synergistic projects and companies that can actually build each other up and help feed into this larger ecosystem. And so that's what I'm hoping to achieve with Regenerate Hudson moving forward. I am also really interested in the opportunity of that is emerging through blockchain technology, and through crypto assets and digital assets. While it's certainly a new phenomenon, it's growing exponentially, and it really is a sandbox for developing new tools and new systems that can help. I think in this larger mission, if they are executed well, to move money and resources into local, regional, regenerative economies. So that really is what Kianga and I met Kianga in the fall of last year, and I heard that she was coming from a Wall Street background. She's coming from a legal background, but was moving into the space of wanting to serve the blockchain and the intersection of blockchain and opportunity zones. And so I thought that was an incredible and auspicious connection. And so I couldn't help but explore that further, and that ultimately resulted in the partnership that we have developed over the last few months. And so I'm thrilled to be working with Kianga. She's incredibly bright and very kind person, and so it makes doing this work really fun. So I will end there, and I guess I'll pass it off to our first presenter.
Thank you, Chris. It's been really a pleasure working with you as well. Auspicious is definitely a terrific word. I'm in fact broadcasting from an exciting business here in Hudson called Barn Fox. That's a co-work space, and created a community in the midst of a pandemic, and was the place where Chris and I bumped into each other and met. And seemingly we're operating on parallel tracks in terms of interest in local economies, new technologies, local currencies. Had been thinking about Opportunity Zone program as an interesting mechanism, a tool. And so I just want to spend a few minutes sharing my screen with everyone and telling you a little bit more about Acre of America and our role with the Opportunity Zone Fund and the work that we're hoping to do here in Hudson. So we are an impact investment manager and advisory firm. And really, as Chris mentioned, excited about this intersection of distributed ledger technology, blockchain, and rural problems. A big impact of the pandemic for me was to make my work in digital assets and financial markets more tangible, to really begin to realize the promise and the potential. There's a lot of utopic language being used in the blockchain space. I'm sure many of you have heard it, and there's a lot of excitement and religious fervor almost about what these technologies or these new asset classes could mean for the future. But in the crisis that we faced last year, it seemed to me that there was really the gap was too wide in terms of adoption, and so was looking for an opportunity to make my work much more important and impactful in the lives of everyday people. So just as a bit of a background, I, as Chris mentioned, have worked in the legal capacity, big Wall Street firms, commodities, trading, energy, derivatives, foreign exchange, and got involved in the blockchain space about 5 years ago. Founded Acre of America Partners in 2018, primarily focused on advising and regulatory trading advice for friends and family. In 2019, expanded and brought in a partner, Meek Feinberg, who is based in Orangeburg, New York. That's Rockland County, also in the Hudson Valley. And we started to do some experimental mining on blockchains. And in 2020 and 21, moved to Hudson. I have lived in the Hudson Valley for about 9 years, but was in Dutchess County before moving to Hudson a little over a year ago. And so today, through meeting Chris and thinking about how we could work together on launching an Opportunity Zone Fund and doing many more things, have now established a permanent office and headquarters here in Hudson, and have started a blockchain venture studio and brought in our first team member, Laura Nicoletti, who I want to thank in advance for all of her help with this webinar. And yeah, over these 6 months, we have made some investments with the fund and have been, really covering an enormous amount of ground. And it's exciting to be able to speak publicly about it really for the first time and invite Farm Ferments and Pocketbook Factory to talk about what they're doing here in Hudson. But just for a few moments, want to give a quick overview of what the Opportunity Zone program is, where it came from. Back in 2017, there was the Investing in Opportunity Act. It was part of a big tax bill that was passed. So we're dealing with basically a federal tax scheme that was bipartisan in its origins. And I'm not sure that a lot of people realize this, that the entire purpose initially anyway was to revitalize underperforming areas and to try to dislodge capital that was basically stuck or Americans were holding because they didn't want to incur taxes on those gains. And my law school friend, Cory Booker, talked about opportunity zones being domestic emerging markets, and that this program could and should be used to really revitalize communities. And that's very much how Chris and I both thought about this tool as not just a boondoggle for real estate developers building condos, and we certainly didn't want to see our precious Hudson Valley kind of turn into that kind of like luxury development mecca, but that this program really maybe offered a unique opportunity for neighbors to support neighbors. And we are hoping that this Opportunity Zone Fund can be a model for a combination of real estate and venture. Its applicability to venture is less spoken about. It's not, I think, as well known that the program can be used to invest in businesses as well as real estate projects. And what the really salient features of the program is that it allows an individual who has capital gains to contribute those gains into a fund that has some particular parameters, but that the taxing on the gains is deferred and reduced. And then for investments that are held for 10 years or more, all taxes on the profits of those investments are eliminated. And so we have here a form of patient capital, and I'm excited for Alex to speak about her work at Harmonia and just this broader concept of patient capital and how important it is when we're talking about revitalizing communities, regeneration, and trying to experiment with new modes of economic development. So why this is pretty exciting from an investor standpoint is that the tax benefits mean that over time, return on capital is significantly more than if taxes had to be incurred in the normal mechanism without this benefit. So the Opportunity Zone program has its limitations. It's a particular structure. It's rigid. It's sort of the typical accredited investor only. And so it's one tool in a toolbox of probably many things that all of us on this call are thinking about. But a hallmark of, I hope, Acre of America's work, and even Regenerate Hudson broadly, is how we can be really creative and combine different methods of investing, how we at Acre can design new financial products. You know, that's something that I've done throughout my legal career, really worked in credit derivatives and, you know, emerging markets in terms of new products. So that's a particular passion of mine, is innovation around financial products and financial services. So we really hope that as we listen and learn and get to know Hudson more and more, those of us who are newer and those of us who've been here for a while, you know, the city is exciting place to be in. It's changing, of course, like all cities, and we're a small city, you know, less than 7,000 people, 2 square miles, and very diverse as far as upstate New York rural communities go. So we have an opportunity, we think, to model, as Chris mentioned, some examples of you know, maybe some solutions and ways that different types of capital can play together and support people who already are in place, and we want them to stay, and we don't want, you know, just the typical gentrification wave to displace, you know, the very, very important values and communities that are here in Hudson. So that is, you know, just a quick perspective on, you know, what we're hoping to, how we're thinking about opportunity zones and using the program for certain types of investments here in the city of Hudson. So with that, I'd love to invite Alex Lunt and Ian Martin to speak to you, introduce themselves and speak to you about Ferments, a really terrific business here in the city of Hudson.
Well, thank you, Kianga, and thank you for having us on this call, Chris, Kianga. This is it feels like an adventure you've started here, and something that is sorely needed, I think, in areas of development like Hudson. I moved to the Hudson Valley really about 5 years ago, and have seen quite a bit of change here. And change is good in a lot of ways, but if it's not managed properly, you start to see things that are you know, not quite right. And so it seems like the project that you're engaged here is an attempt to push things in the right direction, which is hugely appreciated. So I'm going to share my screen quickly, and so really what I'm going to be talking about here is Ferments, the organization that I run. I think everyone can see that. I'm going to make this a full screen here. All right, everyone can see my screen, all right? Cool. Yeah, so I took over as CEO of Ferments in 2019. Ferments is a very interesting company because it was spun off of a nonprofit, Hawthorne Valley Association, in 2017. And in that way, it has an innovative business model. In that we are partly owned by a nonprofit that is doing really wonderful things in the Hudson Valley, and is in a lot of ways the you know, really the forebearer of regenerative economics here in the Hudson Valley, as a biodynamic farm, but also a Waldorf school, a store, many things to the community. It's a really important institution within our community. And so in 2017, this business, Ferments, was spun off as a separate entity, and we are a fermented food company. So we make Hawthorne Valley fermented foods, along with other branded fermented foods and other products in that general arena. Importantly, while we're a for-profit company, we have a very strong mission, which we can talk about in a minute. But that's really part of the fabric of how the company came around, was to not only focus on growing this business, growing this this interesting and successful consumer packaged goods company, but also with the mission of doing good for the community. And we do that. We attempt to do that in several ways. Just quickly, here are our products, so you can see them right off the bat. We've got several more than this, but this is a nice representation of what we sell, in some ways, representation of each of the lines. And so sauerkraut is really our kind of bread and butter product. But we also make fermented vegetables like ginger carrots. We make a kimchi, some other delights. And then recently we launched a hot sauce. So it's actually two hot sauces, and a line of beverages. And really all of them are the same, come from the same source, which is fermented vegetables, and really different formats here. But overall, in and of itself, fermented foods is a really, I think, interesting and important innovation. Really not innovation, it's been around for thousands of years, but an important direction for our food system to move, because these products are highly nutritious, and if done correctly, they can be regenerative, and also functional. So folks that there are lots of really interesting studies that have shown that fermented foods and probiotics are very good for your health, and we're proud to be a part of that. And so, as I mentioned, Farm Ferments was founded with values embedded in its culture, and these values center around several different things. The first is financial sustainability. I mean, in that, in order to accomplish the rest of our goals, we have to become a successful organization. And but that, with that as an underpinning, we have a commitment to the environment and our environmental footprint. We work with local farms for the most part, and many of them engage in regenerative farming, which is a probably kind of a modern iteration of biodynamics, which is the practices used at Hawthorne Valley Farm. So through our support of these farms, we're supporting regenerative agriculture. We also have a focus on reducing our carbon footprint here at the plant. As a for instance, this plant is in Hudson, New York, and it's got a solar array on the roof. And many of our practices internally are focused on reducing our impact. We also have a very strong commitment to the community, which is in some ways, part and parcel of what we're talking about today. We sustain something like 20 good paying jobs with benefits, healthcare benefits. We're about to launch a 401k plan for our employees, and have a real interest in bringing them along as successful members of the community, both through supporting them, with a job, but also, trying to give them a sense for what it is to run, a business that could be considered regenerative. And so we have a goal of teaching financial literacy here at the company. We use obviously our business as the example of that, but all of our employees have a basic understanding of not only what we make, but also how we structure the business and how we can continue to grow. And so those are kind of the main pieces of it. We're focused on the environment. We're focused on our people, the community here around us, and we're really excited about demonstrating to the world that you can run a business like this, become profitable, and do well for shareholders, but also do really well for stakeholders in the broader community. This is the team real quick. Speaking of the jobs that we support here at Farm Ferments. We also support brands that are not part of our internal brand group of products, and so we co-pack for a couple of small but really interesting companies, Poor Devil Pepper Co. And Hosta Hill, two really lovely brands within the fermented food space, and we're very excited to share shelf space with them out in the market. This demonstrates in some ways the pathway for our impact as a company, but more or less what we just spoke to. More of the same here, but something that I haven't gone over before. This is a nice little graph that shows the distribution of our farms, and so really important. The vast majority of what we make comes from farms that are within, call it 210 miles of the plant. And all of them are organic. We have all of our products are organic products, and several of them are either biodynamic or have a strong bias towards regenerative agriculture, which again, the practices of which are really important for accomplishing some of the things that Chris was talking about, which is, to not be extractive, but instead to be regenerative. And that's a really important thing for our land here. Quickly, our retailers, they stretch across. This is just a sense for the business and how, where we've come and, where you can find our products. But we're really proud partners of Whole Foods in the Northeast here. Over the last year and a half, we launched with Wegmans, which is a really fantastic and well-regarded conventional grocer out of Rochester, but that is now spread pretty well across the Northeast. Hannaford, some other really wonderful natural markets like Mom's. Recently launched with Fresh Direct and Giant Eagle, and are about to launch with several ShopRites in the area. So again, a pretty diverse group of retailers. And one of our goals really is to be able to not make this a product that can only be found at a place like Whole Foods, but a place where it's accessible to the largest swath of folks. All right, and then we've got this is the board team, but it's in some ways a way for me to introduce Alex here. We could talk for a while about all of our board members, but Alex Lunt is a partner at Armonia. Armonia is doing some really kind of wonderful things in the capital space, and has been a really key partner of Farm Ferments since its inception back in 2017. And so I will pass the baton over to Alex, unless anybody has any quick questions for me, which I'm always happy to answer. And Alex, let me know if there's anything that I can jump in on, but I'll pass the baton to you here.
Thank you, Ian. I think our story with Farm Ferments has been a really great one, and atypical in a lot of ways, because it's not a normal company, but in other ways, not normal for all of the wonderful reasons that Ian was mentioning. And it would be incredible if there were regenerative businesses like this at every turn, but that's not yet the case. And I think that's part of the reason that we feel a tremendous responsibility to really prove out this model. What we've been throwing around the word regenerative, but I truly believe that this is a regenerative business. Regenerative isn't just about the practices on the land, which is how we think about it a lot of the time in our work with farming and everything that means. but this is about creating wealth for all stakeholders. And that makes it actually a very kind of perfect example of the way that Armonia would like to work. It's sometimes complicated to explain Armonia because we're not traditional impact investors. We have capital as a tool, but it's much bigger than that. And we work more through our values and supporting the incredible partners like those who started Farm Ferments and now Ian, who's at the helm there. And so that is how we really do like to work. And it's a little bit of a pioneering kind of role because capital has had very different goals for a very long time. And we believe, like everyone else on this call, that it needs to be, we kind of have to rethink it and think of capital as being in service to our environment and our communities and our people. Capital for making more capital is what's led us here. And it's a scary place, like Chris was saying. So businesses like these are what we think the future needs to look like. And I was so grateful to meet Kianga here. I just moved up to Hudson this fall with my girlfriend, and from the city, it was a total COVID move, and I'm a bit of a cliche in a lot of ways, but meeting and getting to know this community of people who really care about Hudson, about the people that existed here before us, about the culture, the beauty, the art. It's felt like a total honor to be part of that, and but also a huge responsibility that I think we all have to ensure the continuity of that. And I was very happily surprised that, not surprised, I knew we had a partner in Farm Ferments, but it felt like a really grounding partner to have as I was embarking kind of my life and my career in this realm. And we do need more people and more capital like what Regenerate Hudson is bringing. And so I was really pleased to be able to introduce Kianga and Chris to the Farm Ferments team, and I hope that it can set a model for many more businesses like this. Please do let me know if you'd like me to say anything else, but that sort of covers it.
Well, that's great, Alex. Thank you. And Ian, we can hear from Gabriel and Sean about Pocketbook Factory, and toward the end of our session, kind of get into a conversation and ask each other questions. And I think one of the questions we'll have for everyone, I'll preview it so you can be thinking about your responses. What does the word regenerate mean to you? And I think in this program we're trying to illustrate a model of a regenerative business, a model, and Gabriel and Sean will speak to the question of how is real estate development regenerative. Someone might think that that's an oxymoron, but I think that if that is your view, you'll learn some things hopefully in our next presentation. But yeah, toward the end we'll open it up a little bit and we can all have a chat. So I'll pass it on to Gabriel and Sean to talk about Pocketbook Factory.
Thank you so much, Kianga, and thank you, Chris, for hosting this. We're super excited to be having this forum to discuss regenerative real estate. We don't, in our work, have too many places besides Kianga's office to bounce some of these ideas around, and that's a lot of what we've been doing. My background is in real estate development. I work with my family office, and we're a fourth generation office based in New York. And more specifically, I've focused on actually historic renovations. And my history in Hudson goes back about 12 years. My grandparents built actually a net zero house in Hudson around that time. And so for about the last decade, I've been spending significant time in Hudson, and I live up here. But we were not walking around looking to do a real estate deal in Hudson, and we definitely weren't talking about regenerative real estate. But what I've realized, and I continue to be encouraged by, is that we were talking about the same elements that I now understand makes up regenerative real estate, right? We were thinking about community, we were thinking about sustainability, we were really thinking about how we take an old factory, which used to be the center of commerce, employment, and livelihood in Hudson, and kind of revitalize it to do something new, but to still serve a function that it was meant to serve. And so before I go into trying to lay out how we're grounding, these different elements into kind of real world programs and how we're thinking about our building process, for me, the story of the Pocketbook Factory is completely centered, or its origins really come from a woman named Eleanor Ambos, who was an amazing woman who passed away this last year, but for the last 40 or 50 years has been essentially stewarding old, defunct industrial spaces and warehouse spaces throughout the Hudson Valley, and whose stewardship and kind of her own care of community, open space, access to the arts really led us down a path that we're on now. And so if you'll bear with me, it should work. I'm gonna play you a quick 3-minute video that we actually found after she passed away, which talks a little bit about her history, how she came to the site, and the past history of the factory. So, and also you get to hear a different voice than mine, which I kind of like. So let's see if I can get this up real quick.
"516 Washington Street, a building built in the early 1880s by William Harder as the Empire Knitting Mill, closed its doors and ended almost 100 years of making a variety of goods for American consumers. From union suits to war goods to pocketbooks, it was a very productive Hudson building. Empty for the better part of 40 years, it has been used for the last 21 years as a private warehouse. 4 generations of Hudson people spent their working lives making and finishing goods on its 3 wide open manufacturing floors. The Union Mill building output was 2,000 dozen shirts and drawers a day, 5 days a week, making it a center of the Hudson economy and the largest clothing production business at that time in the world. In 1918, the American government commissioned Empire Mills to produce a variety of goods to supply troops in World War I. But by 1929, the Mohawk Novelty Company leased out the first and second floors to make suitcases, trunks, and handbags. The building became known to Hudson as the Pocketbook Factory. Again in World War II, now operating as the Mohawk Novelty Company, plant production shifted from leather hat boxes, wardrobe trunks, overnight cases, and cowhide traveling bags to canvas tents, knapsacks, field and ammunition bags, shovel and grenade covers, and first aid kits. In October of 1944, the company was awarded the Army-Navy E for Excellence in War Production. In 1947, while the Pocketbook Factory was making bags in Hudson, a 20-year-old woman immigrated to America from Nazi Germany. You found your way to Barnard College and then Bryn Mawr. A trip to France when you were 30 years old helped crystallize your aesthetic ideal in which beauty has a natural place in everyday life. It was then that you decided to pursue a career as an interior designer. With your personal motto, everyone should live in a French chateau or the local equivalent. You had a skill of seeing beauty and giving life to things that were unusual and once used for different purposes. In 1980, you bought the 1909 Metropolitan Building, a long empty electrical parts business in Long Island City. With 1,800 broken windows, many other structural issues, you saw it for its industrial beauty. With time, creative energy, and money, you turned it into a building with great spirit and style. Weddings, fashion and film shoots, and parties found your Metropolitan Building the exact right place to be. Meanwhile, in the early 80s in Hudson, a mother and son purchased the Pocketbook Factory building with boarded up windows with the idea of creating apartments. Nothing happened. For sale sign went up. In the late 1980s, the building was purchased by a New York City gallerist with the vision of creating an artist center. Nothing happened. Another for sale sign went up. The arched windows on all sides remained missing and boarded up. It had been silent, empty, neglected for almost 40 years. Luckily, you who saw the magic in the Metropolitan Building found a similar love for a building in Hudson. Your whimsical artistic sensibility, lack of fear of the difficult, and your love of the beauty of the building's spirit led you to purchase it on the second to the last day of 1998.
Okay, so thank you for letting me play that. That makes me always feel kind of special and warm, because Eleanor was such an integral part to this project and to us getting involved in the redevelopment and the adaptive reuse sort of project we've envisioned here today. And so now I'm going to share my presentation. So just quickly taking off from where that presentation left off, I kind of wanted to just show you 4 different maps of Hudson that were taken in 4 different time periods. So you can see a little bit of the growth of Hudson, specifically surrounding the factory. So the factory, which was, that's the wrong date. That should say 1889, so I apologize there. But in 1880s, when this building was developed, this gives you an idea of the spread of housing kind of surrounding the factory. By 1949, when it switches hands to the Mohawk Novelty Company, you see a real development of a community and a neighborhood that surrounds the factory. Specifically, we have a bunch of really cool documents that kind of explain how the growth in housing was related to the growth in jobs at the Pocketbook factory. Then we get to sort of the first modern zoning in the 90s. And now we've kind of zoomed out a bit, because you can see as Hudson progressed where housing developed and where there was sort of a shortage of development in Hudson. And now we're in the kind of current 2000s map, which is the current zoning we operate under. And you can see all of Hudson really broken down by the different zoning districts. And why I like this map and why I think it's super informative for one of the major drivers of our project is you can kind of see Warren Street, which is this purple commercial corridor, which really dominates the Hudson commercial and retail experience. It's a very traditional American town, linear retail experience. And as Hudson continues to progress, it's become at least clear to us that no alternative, commercial experience, commercial corridor existed. And what we were seeing was, as rents moved up, that you were getting more of a homogeneous experience on Warren Street, and there wasn't really a good alternative options that had affordable rents for artists, for artisans, and for non-traditional retail. And as we looked at the map and we saw our building, North 6th Street, which is kind of located in the only other sort of general commercial district, we really saw the opportunity to create that sense of place there. And more importantly, to stay with the history of the building as a driver of jobs, as a driver of inclusivity, and as a driver of the future of what Hudson really has to offer. So again, without talking about regenerative real estate, 3 years ago when we got involved in this project, we were talking about adaptive reuse. We were talking about how we could focus our uses to allow for small business growth in the surrounding area, how we could use sustainable sort of programs to create a sources and uses stack that was progressive and different than the other projects we've done. And how could we kind of take what the residents and the professionals and our community members in Hudson were telling us about the spaces that they needed, about the spaces that they envisioned as being productive for their families and their businesses, and incorporate that into our planning. These are some overviews of the existing building. It's quite a large building. It's about 70,000 square feet. It's the largest undeveloped historic asset left in Hudson. And it has many challenges. I mean, this building will be expensive to renovate. And that presented a challenge which really opened up a lot of opportunities. As Kianga mentioned, obviously we're in an opportunity zone, and I'll use this to kind of bifurcate the two opportunities that we are exploring. I'm going to predominantly be speaking about the real estate venture and the development, which is an opportunity zone business. And when Sean, my business partner, comes on, he'll speak a little bit more about the operating company that's going to live within this structure and operate additional opportunity zone businesses. And those two things work hand in hand, and they kind of go to what is kind of a really essential part of this project, which is if we wanted to create spaces within the building that were open for nonprofit use, if we wanted to have rents that could be what we call below market in the $15 to $20 square foot range for small businesses sprinkled throughout this building, if we wanted spaces without paywalls, we had to create an economic anchor within this building to allow that, right? To allow that form of diversity in size of space, in cost of space, and in what the space was using for. So just quickly, this is some renderings of what the finished product will look like. Just to orient you, North 6th Street, Prospect, and Washington. Just going through the different angles. And this is what I want to get to. So now we get to the breakdown of the building. And our anchor in this building is this 40-room hotel and the food and beverage and wellness. And this will be operated as our operating company, which Sean will talk about, and which is very focused on a different form of, or a different iteration of the same regenerative principles that we talk about: community, sustainability, inclusivity. And he will really go into how these uses iterate out. When we say a wellness center, you know, that is born out of our belief that, you know, bathing is a human right. And we want to create a space that's accessible for daily practice for our neighbors, for the residents, and for visitors of Hudson. And we're very focused on a connection to the water. You know, Hudson obviously sits on the Hudson River, but throughout the experience of Hudson, there's not much connection to water. So the story of water retention, the story of stormwater, of gray water use, those things all get iterated out in our project. And we're gonna kind of touch on that through the programs we're utilizing. But as you see the breakdown of space in the building, I just want to sort of reiterate that the hospitality portion really opened up the world of regenerative uses throughout the building. It allowed us to anchor kind of a variety of uses and of essentially rents that would allow us to go to small businesses, to go to nonprofits that we couldn't accommodate without it. The first tax credit we're kind of utilizing is a historic tax credit. You're going to see a couple of just simple elevation plans of our facade. And to keep it really simple, the historic tax credit program is a federal and state program. It is a really amazing program that really incentivizes you to reuse, restore, and rehabilitate old buildings. And what you do is you lock yourself into a historic iteration. So you'll see our facades, our doors, our opening, they're all consistent with the history of the building. This is actually the major historic facade on North 6th Street. And this is also where you can see us starting to introduce new elements to the building. You can clearly see we've put solar panels on our roofs. And while that's not obviously historically how the roofs were, the historic tax credit program really works with owners and developers to realize sustainable elements of their project. This is just the last picture. And historic tax credits, we actually use it as a financing mechanism. I bring this up because an additional tax credit program we'll talk about called the New Market Tax Credits also is used as a financing mechanism. And this goes again to this idea that we were trying to use alternative financing mechanisms to create a project that would not be reliant on a traditional commercial construction loan. We believe that if we could be flexible in our sources of capital and find capital that was coming from sources that were aligned with our values and incentivize our values, we could better pursue those outlets. So just another thing, this is a slide about environmental justice, and more importantly, it's starting to investigate where are the avenues within existing programs from NYSERDA and from other state and federal organizations that we can utilize as a part of our project to push forward things we believe in. And again, one of those things is that we are just starting to dig into is the issue of water that I spoke about earlier. Tax credits, new market tax credits. So just quickly, new market tax credits is another thing that, similar to opportunity zones, we should look at for all projects in Hudson. And again, as we maybe have our next conversation about how we could look at blockchain in the future to help democratize some of these things, this would be a great example. New market tax credits could be applicable for any type of project, whether that's commercial, whether that's residential. The issue is there's a high barrier and cost to studying it. There's a ton of brain damage, and you need attorneys and you need tax accountants. And so the program is pretty simple. Hudson qualifies. It actually works on an identical map as the opportunity zones. And through job creation and through investment and development in local businesses, you qualify for a tax credit that you can use as a financing mechanism. And it's also tied to how you're benefiting the community. And so as Sean goes and talks a little bit more about our operating company and the things we're doing and the things we're planning on doing through that venture, again, this becomes an important tool that if we can figure out ways to more efficiently pursue them, especially for residents or for small businesses, that could piggyback off of some of the work that our professionals do, then I think we can really start to create access to programs that are currently kind of out of the reach of projects that are under $1 million. So this just kind of illustrates a little bit about how that program works. Basically, if you're doing any sort of construction project or any sort of major renovation, through your investment and through your creation of jobs, you are essentially automatically qualifying. So this looked at a $10 million construction project, which is less than ours. So we will have more benefit than this, but this is just kind of a quick explanation and a breakdown of job creations, earnings, sales, and how those three factors really play into the new market tax credit program. Okay, I wouldn't read this if I were you, but I put it up there so that I had something to put up there. PACE. I don't know if people are familiar with PACE. It's the Property Assessed Clean Energy program. We call it CPACE because it's a commercial program that we've sort of utilized. PACE has been around for the last 25 years in, I think, 28 states right now. New York just passed PACE legislation about 1.5 years ago. And I really look at this as a game changer. And I think this is similar to new market tax credits, where if we can create ways to democratize the process and to create efficiencies in the process, this is a program that single family homes to small businesses to major businesses should be utilizing as a way to focus on renewable energy systems and how to make buildings more energy efficient. The PACE program is basically a private public partnership between the state government and private lenders, though you also have some non-for-profit players in there as well. And it's basically a self-liquidating lending program that solely focuses on environmental and energy efficiency. And so what it does is it forces a developer to look holistically at their project and figure out which of the elements are creating efficiencies within the building, where can they find more efficiencies, and then basically provide a source of financing that works on 20, 25, and 30-year amortization schedules that incentivize the developer to do these projects. So a great example of this would be solar panels, right? Solar is probably the most utilized expense for PACE loans. And if you can easily show that the addition of solar panels will create a more efficient building, and you can show all the systems surrounding that, from insulation to the support for those panels, you can essentially create a low interest, long-term financing mechanism to pay for these different projects. And so the challenge becomes, or I don't want to say the challenge, the key to this PACE program we are finding out is two things. One, it's getting a really good energy engineer. And we're working with ME Engineering, which is a regional firm based out of, I think, Troy, New York, though they have an office in Hudson and they have a ton of work in Columbia County. And we work actually with an underwriter from the bank. And so what happens is you look at your construction budget, you look at how you're going to build, and then you start exploring through individual line items where you can do better, right? Where can we be doing more? Where can we be pursuing really exciting sort of avenues for efficiencies and for sustainability? And you then work with the underwriter to make sure that it all flows and that you're creating a construction budget where you can utilize PACE financing to the maximum. And in this case, we are essentially using PACE financing as a substitute for our traditional commercial construction loan. And because it is long-term and because it really allows you to invest in sustainable building methods and sustainable systems within your building, it creates the incentives for long-term owners and people who want to invest in their community to really go and do work and put in systems that you couldn't otherwise afford. This goes a little bit into that breakdown. I just wanted to demonstrate like how it works as far as working with the energy consultant. So she'll look at the things you're doing within your building, the systems that we're planning, and she'll start to identify where we could be more efficient. And then from there, you start to look at layering in additional programs. So once you start investigating PACE, you kind of open up a world of overlap between the things that PACE is incentivizing you with and existing state NYSERDA programs. And here we can get a little bit more nitty gritty, right? When we looked at our project, one of the things we got really excited about is what they're calling carbon neutral ready, which is also called net zero ready. This is a really exciting NYSERDA program that we actually have been accepted to. And if we want to move forward with it, the benefits are there. And basically we won't be using fossil fuels in our building. And for doing that, NYSERDA gives us assistance on how to plan that, but they also give us a grant for $3 a square foot for anywhere in the building we're not using fossil fuels. And that's just one example of a NYSERDA program that overlaps with PACE financing. And by doing the legwork with PACE, we had done the legwork we needed for the carbon neutral ready, and we're now pursuing both simultaneously, and all these different programs can be layered. Very rarely will you see PACE say that you can't double down on this with a NYSERDA program. And the other thing, and again, this goes to kind of understanding where we could play with things like blockchain. Almost all the other incentives that NYSERDA comes up with are a part of I think it's called the CFA, the Consolidated Funding Application, where you're like a common application to college. You're filling out one application, you're clicking off a lot of different programs, and you're trying to get accepted into as many as possible. And so this kind of lays out some of the other incentives that we are currently applying to as a part of our consolidated funding app. And each of them goes to another sustainable part of this project, which we're really excited about. And it also shows you kind of how we're still learning ourselves what these avenues are, what we can pursue, and how we can kind of stack them all together. This is a really complicated civil engineering drawing, but again, this was us looking at how utilities are coming into the building and how we can be using things like gray water, how we can distribute water throughout our site. And honestly, Hudson has some stormwater issues. And so we were looking at how can we solve our own stormwater issues without adding to the burden of the community or adding to the burden of the main lines. And when necessary, working with the city to upgrade, utilities in the street and to kind of plan a little bit for the future. So this is a good kind of illustration of what I was trying to talk to you about. If you look up here on the sources, you can kind of see how we've stacked this project with a PACE loan, with a new market tax credit investor and a historic tax credit investor. And we're conservative business people, so we don't count on all the NYSERDA programs, but as those come in and as those flow, those will allow us to balance out and reduce things like the PACE loan or reduce things like our purchase money mortgage if we decide that that's beneficial. But this really gets to what I believe is how a sources for a regenerative project could start looking for the future, how you could start utilizing alternative sources of financing, alternative grants, and replacing commercial construction lending. And by doing that and relying on programs that are either tax credits that are getting fulfilled through actually the production of the credit, right? So through the historic renovation, through the creation of the jobs, those investors are getting paid back by the creation of the credit. What it's doing is it's creating a better stack for the future, where in 7 years or 5 years, when all these sort of tax credit programs end the life, you're left with your money in it, a PACE loan, and that's really it. And so that gives you real flexibility to continue moving and continue to grow the asset as it moves into the future. And this is something that I really geek out and nerd out on, because, throughout my experience in real estate, the pressure from, a high interest construction loan oftentimes puts real stress on the ability to do some of these programs, right? The biggest benefit we have as a long-term holder or family office or multi-generational is to stretch out that timeline and to really look at things over 10, 15, 25 years. And that's what allows us to utilize a stack like this. And I'm gonna actually pass it to my partner, Sean, who is gonna talk about way more fun, interesting, and hopefully aesthetic things than I did. But, as the development goes, we're so excited about, embarking on this 3-year journey and continuing to explore new avenues that the regenerative practice is taking us down, and continue to think flexibly about how we're creating a community asset within this new development. And I'm going to pass it to Sean now to begin talking to you about that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Gabriel. So yeah, I wanted to kind of take a little time and walk through some of the kind of higher level program and concepts for the space, starting with public spaces. As Gabriel mentioned, one of our, original pieces of the thesis is we need to pair a strong economic driver in the building and then leave as much space open as possible for public enjoyment. And that was important. That was always important to Eleanor and to us, because kind of when you walk inside, the first thing you feel is the sense of awe. And so, Gabriel, you can go to the next slide. And so, how do we do that, right? Like, what are the spaces that can actually be public space? What feels like an amenity, and how do you both, architecturally create that? And then, how do you signal and draw in both local community members and obviously visitors who would be at the hotel, but really thinking about creating a space that is intersectional, is diverse, and provides something that Hudson doesn't offer. And it's funny to kind of think about how we're all sitting in little offices right now, scattered through Hudson if you're here or somewhere else, and just the sense of there aren't large open community spaces in this town, with the exception of the library, which is really amazing, that there's no payroll, right? There's no sort of expectation of commerce that you could gather for work or gather for socializing or gather to simply be in a beautiful, inspiring place. And that's true for both the lounge, which I was just speaking about, and then that kind of spills out onto this massive courtyard. Gabriel showed an aerial of that before, and here it is again. It's about half an acre of courtyard space that we have. And we really thought both about how do you landscape that, how do you create sort of a diversity of areas for relaxing, for meditative thought, for walking, for gathering in that sort of large central green there. And then also, how do you make this, how do you create circulation within the city that doesn't already exist? Interestingly, Hudson's small, but it is primarily, a lot of people experience it through driving. So this kind of shows a current, maybe current paradigm of how people circulate down North 6th Street, where our building is. They basically drive from Warren Street, which is the main commercial street, out to Fairview, right? It's just sort of like a pass through. And so what we were saying is, okay, if we start breaking down spaces and creating a public amenity on this thoroughfare, how will that change the fabric, the urban fabric of the city, and how people feel and think about the space? And so this shows an alternative circulation that really would open up this whole area. And so you see the yellow basically traces public circulation with no paywall. So really thinking about how do you get people or residents to move through and come to think of this as part of their journey as they're walking, and maybe that's for recreation, or maybe that's, you know, super functional. Maybe that's like a pass through. Interesting, we're kind of like on a diagonal in between the public library and Oakdale Lake, which is where like the youth department runs summer camp. And so like, it's not a pleasant walk right now, actually, to go from really anywhere else in town up along 6th Street. It's pretty busy. The sidewalks aren't well taken care of. And so both, you know, we'll improve all of those, but then like, how do you create these other journeys and circulation through our site? Yeah. I'm gonna switch to my presentation now. See if you can see this and full screen. So that was thinking about sort of public spaces as amenities. Let's see, bring my shared window to the front. How do I do that? Sorry, guys. Pardon me. Sharing. Can you all see that or no? Okay. So now I'm going to speak about our operating company for the hospitality venture and what that will look and feel like, and kind of go into a little bit of our explorative thoughts on, you know, both from a theoretical or kind of like academic perspective, what the core values of this new operating company, but also a brand, will be, and then how that actually flows through in interesting ways to principles of regeneration or regenerative hospitality specifically. Zeze Hotel is a radical new hospitality brand, and it's really meant to serve sort of a generation, maybe it's our generation or future generations, that feel rooted in movement or feel rooted in experience, maybe over than one particular location. And sort of like, how do you speak to that? How do you create sense or place of home in a diversity of settings? And this project was actually born, interestingly, out of about a decade ago in Hudson, when my partner and I moved here. They're an artist, and my background is in hospitality. And so I sort of spent my 20s and most of my life sort of thinking about how do you create spaces that are truly welcoming and diverse, and sort of like maybe push the boundaries also on like, what is your sort of level of comfort or conception of home, for example, and how do you sort of like further that or change it? And then my partner, who's an artist, was, you know, very much kind of always pushing ideas and pushing concepts on like, well, why just stay in your comfort zone? Why don't we create aesthetic or visual or experiential moments that really sort of like can almost create more embodiment or awareness on a personal or social level within spaces? And so the brand was sort of built out of this tension or question. And then, so Zeze is a word that, you know, we've sort of ascribed the meaning to be this like place between sleep, hallucination, and wakefulness, which I think is a very generative space. And as an idea, you know, for how do you do that physically, or how do you manifest that sort of like liminal space in architecture, both physical and perhaps social. And this kind of talks to that a little bit more. So once again, it's sort of like this somatic or sensory space where you can further personal embodiment or connection to others. And these are images from our original space that we designed, which was in Hudson. It was actually, it was a a big old house that we slowly renovated. And then we were like, what are we doing with all of the space? We don't need it. And we built in basically a residency model program where we would invite friends and collaborators to come and make work and sort of use our space as a platform and a resource, both for them to show work, but also to like live or have a place to come to. And so that sort of like that DNA has traveled through into what we're building is now the brand and the operating company for the hospitality venture. And then this talks more about, so what is Zeze Hudson specifically in this building in the Pocketbook factory? So it'll be a contemporary hotel and wellness center. We kind of think of Hudson as being in the heart of the Hudson Valley. And now we've talked a lot about this. It's set in a restored Pocketbook factory. And it's, you know, we're kind of imagining it as this place where hospitality is in conversation and meeting with radical art and design. And design meaning, you know, you could take that very broadly, right? That's, you know, not just physical design, but also sort of social design or economic design. And then, you know, when you walk into this building, I don't know, you know, probably a lot of our viewers have been in old factories, but this one's particularly impressive and almost like the sense of awe or like, you know, otherworldliness as soon as you walk into these large regular floor plates with light flooded in on all sides. So we talk a lot about like, how are you filling a historic space with new spirits or new ideas and new economies? And then so thinking a little bit about what is this venture? What are we going to do here? You saw this slide before from Gabriel, you know, how are all of these pieces interconnected? How is a hotel in conversation with an art space? What is that art space? Is it experiential? Is it an institution that's opening its doors and you've then created both like a local amenity and something that's attracting kind of like a steady stream of visitors to Hudson? How does that relate to retail? You know, are those like, you know, on the ground floor, how would you kind of create the opportunity for affordable retail? And then you have world-class art on the top floor, and adjacent to that, you have a massive public space with no paywall. How do you create a cross-section of community, both economically and socially, and how do all of those things flow together, and how do those conversations and adjacencies become very generative and productive in a small town or in a small city, sorry. And then we talked a little bit about the lounge, so I'm going to skip this. Rooms, you know, part of what we're imagining for the hotel is that there's a real diversity in room size and type, and you're really highlighting the historic envelope that's simple and beautiful and inspiring. And all you're really doing is thinking about how do you preserve that and add a layer that is contemporary and is a new take on, you know, is pretty vastly different than what most hospitality spaces do, both in terms of like materiality and almost level of finish or layers of it. We talk a lot about, you know, designing sustainably, really reconsidering materials, reconsidering what I frankly see when you go into most hotel rooms is just like excessive. There's just like a ton of stuff. Like most of that stuff is made of plastic. Most of that stuff is not very good for you health-wise. And how do we sort of like really break down every component in a hotel room and reconsider, do we need that? Is that what hospitality is about? Is that the feeling? Is that the ethos? And so really, you know, part of this project and this brand is about breaking down and reconsidering every aspect of how you might experience an urban hotel. The wellness center. So we're all in the project super passionate about bathing and come from it from different angles, but you know, kind of this like maybe ancestral memory of bathing socially or bathing together that almost every culture in the world, I would say, has its own tradition of. And somehow in America, you know, we flourished during the Industrial Revolution, and everyone eventually got their own bathtub, right? But how do you rewind, and how do you think about, how do you create like ritual spaces for wellness? in a social context. And physically, like, what will the building look like? I don't want to go too deeply into that here, but I think what's important is that idea of like thinking of bathing as a human right and not a luxury, and how do you create the opportunity in spaces for that. And that kind of layers in also really nicely to a lot of what Gabriel talked about, this really diverse capital stack, and how we're being, both very thoughtful and very scrappy about ensuring that we're getting, our stack and our sort of sources of funds are not just sort of like from equity, where then you're, looking to maximize profit. So we're looking to maximize accessibility, for example, in this space. And how do we utilize like PACE loans to do that? It's pretty fascinating. The restaurant is a beautiful trust space, also really inspiring when you walk in. And, I think we'll operate this in partnership with local talent, meaning a chef and someone who's an experienced operator. And kind of the baseline, just the starting place, is to know that you're creating ongoing partnerships with local growers and farmers and producers and chefs. And, the exact model that the restaurant takes is what we're exploring now, but there's so many layers to how that could be disrupt or be a departure from a traditional restaurant. How do you build in education? How do you build in mentorship? How do you build in, like sharing in your success in a business with the people who are supporting it and lifting it up with the products that they're creating? And so that's sort of like the baseline, and we're really excited about, as this further develops, what the model will specifically be. Garden Cafe, I love to talk about in our courtyard. There's a large sort of terraced space, and we've always imagined this small, beautiful room is directly adjacent to that. How do you start creating an educational space next to terraced gardens where, perhaps we're partnering with a local educational organization that centers food security or independence. So how are you growing things in the garden? How are those coming inside and being processed and transformed, and then sort of getting lifted up through the building into spaces where they're being served? I won't talk too much about the bar, but we fully believe that music and embodiment and, movement and performance are super important for health and for our souls and for our spirits, and creating spaces for that. So there's a beautiful room on the ground floor of the building that we've imagined for those sort of happenings. Programming, this speaks a little bit more to, we kind of envision the entire hotel as a platform for people to come to and utilize to express themselves, and that could be through diverse mediums. And really thinking about also sort of the ebb and flow of currently, hospitality in Hudson is super busy all summer, super packed on the weekends, and you still do have a seasonal economy. So how do you both try to, lift that up so it isn't quite as seasonal, and there's like a better, it's better both for the town in terms of not having big cycles, but then also for our business, how is it more sustainable? But in the meantime, how do you also build in different structures or like a way to support work? So we could have residencies during 3 months of the year where we're inviting local artists or global artists to come and make work in response to the space and in response to this place. Okay, and then approach. So, I sort of led with a concept for the space. And then as Gabriel said, when we started this project, our practice wasn't based in regenerative theory or thinking, but then as we started sort of like working through our values and then aligning with a lot of the reading and scholarship that exists specifically for regenerative hospitality, it was amazing to see how easily these lined up. And it was to the point where as I was reading, a list of sort of like 5 tenets of regenerative hospitality, they were almost in the same order of these, values that we've been developing over time. So I want to run through ours and then kind of like relate them. So fermented, and you can tell, the brand is rather fresh and a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so roll with me on the values, but fermented is a metaphor for like a physiochemical approach to life. How are you thinking about circulation or filtration or regeneration, and even digestion? Like, how are you digesting or transforming something, a problem, into a solution, or not even that much of a binary, but how are you sort of like extracting in a positive way? How are you pulling out the benefits of, you know, like a challenge into something that's beautiful and regenerative and better for people, or for the planet, or for the economy. Queer as one of our values, in the sense of experimental and different and new and multifaceted, and really celebrating and centering otherness. I think our society in particular for a long time has steered away from that, and now, as part of a really, I think, amazing global reconsidering of what makes humanity beautiful, is recentering otherness and celebrating that. And even so, queerness, how do you think about queering architecture or queering hospitality? And we really use it as a verb and not as a descriptor. Inclusive spaces, that's really thinking once again about centering diversity and creating safe spaces for those who in the past or still currently feel marginalized, or like spaces aren't generally made for them. Fluid in the sense of how do you design to embrace adaptation, change, evolution, circularity within embedded systems. Grounded, this was sort of our word, or you know, and I think relates really nicely to honoring a sense of place, which is super important within regeneration. You know, how does history and ancestry, current community, future spirits or ideas, and the planet or the earth, how is any idea grounded and ladder up to these, to being grounded in a place? And then embodied as sort of like, you know, this is that most aspirational sense of the brand. Like, how do you create opportunities and experiences for interpersonal growth or presentness and connection and joy? How am I doing on time? Okay. So, yeah, I thought it was fascinating how all of these things, the sort of like continuity between what I was reading and then what we've intuitively been working on inside. And so I'm really excited to further develop and strengthen the thinking and in the practice of that in our project. And then so I sort of, talking about practice, I thought about 3 ways, or sort of very practically, like we have problems that we're looking to solve. Both, you know, we hear from community members about local issues and problems, and being community members, we also have a very good sense of these ourselves. And then we have business challenges, and sort of like, how do you create solutions out of 2 challenges that, and this is sort of like the most fun problem solving, and I think kind of the most like elastic part of, or what I'm most excited about in regeneration, is this like elastic explorative approach that's based in problem solving and curiosity. So one thing we heard was like, yeah, how Hudson doesn't have, you know, good jobs, good paying jobs are hard to come by. And then the business challenge when we'd go talk to other hoteliers in Hudson is like, oh, it's really hard to get well-trained staff here. People are always quitting. Like, you know, no one has experience in New York. We have to bring people from the city. And for us, you know, being 3 years out, we have the luxury of time to design a system that changes those, that transforms those 2 issues and creates something that's, you know, like a beautiful program or system and benefit to the people who live and work here. And so on this, I love to make charts like this by hand, and I don't love to put them into PowerPoint presentations, so bear with me. Basically, the base level at the bottom is like what exists now. There's very kind of like ground level training within the high schools, and Questar or BOCES, these are local organizations for hospitality. But it doesn't quite get you to the point where you're able to perform as as you're starting to work in these industries. And so like, how would we pick up and collaborate with these organizations and then basically do workforce training and development where you have on-site theoretical, on-site practical training, and then those become internships within our operating business. And then there's like layered in ongoing classes Then there's part or full-time work. Then there's upward mobility to management. Then there's support for higher education so that you could attend regional or national or even international schools where, if you're passionate about hospitality, there is a path forward. Or there's also this loop where like, you don't have to do that, and you can, you know, have a stable, amazing career. And the other thing, this is actually how I originally left Columbia County, was by building my schools and then moving across the country to California and working in management in bars and restaurants. So I really personally know and feel this journey, and I'm excited to create a clear ladder within our business for youth and people in Hudson if they're interested in that. This is another challenge I thought is kind of like a little case study. Water management, Gabriel talked about this, and then sort of like at a very practical level with an engineering drawing, but then we're like, well, water is literally the most beautiful, important design. Like, why don't we center that in our design for the property? Why aren't we celebrating water and not just sort of like directing it underground through pipes? So this sort of looks at like a central feature in that lobby lounge might be a fountain, and maybe that fountain is fed through catchment on the roof where you're creating sort of, this actually already exists on the site. There's basically catchment from our roof leaders into a historic cistern, and then it just gets dumped into the, you know, current like sewer system, which is crazy. So how are we instead repurposing that and then feeding gardens, feeding fountains, feeding plantings on the building, feeding plantings in the room? How are you exposing the sort of like beautiful and functional nature of a system? And even the bathhouse, you know, how does gray water come out of the bathhouse and feed into a cistern that's then creating beauty and green on this property? This is the last one I'll go through because I think I'm short on time. Long-term housing and transient housing in Hudson. This is like a massive problem right now, and some of the most, you know, interesting and productive and critical feedback we've gotten on our project is actually about housing. Hudson needs more affordable housing. And while this building isn't suited for that, you know, we have been putting this question to ourselves, well, like, how do we actually support housing justice, and how can even the essence of being a hotel here, how can that help transform a local market? So now I sort of like, this is the paradigm that exists. There's like 400 Airbnbs, 200 plus hotel rooms. If you look on Zillow on any given day, maybe there's 5 apartments and none of them are affordable. In 3 years, this is sort of like aspirational a little bit, but, you know, hopefully there's some housing projects coming online in Hudson, which are really important, which are both affordable and market rate. And so how do you, one, add more units? How do you actually increase hotel capacity? And there's our Zeze at 40 units. And that creates downward pressure on an Airbnb market, which is basically, you know, most of the Airbnbs are not owner occupied. So it isn't even people sort of like working to support their property that they live in. It's folks who are looking to extract or make money off of, you know, a quasi economy. So how do you sort of like create downward market pressure for Airbnbs, which adds units back to the local mix? And then within our hotel model, you know, there's also, it's very real that, you know, tourism has all of these very strong economic benefits, but then it also creates the risk for more housing injustice if the city grows without proper growth on the sort of like long-term housing side. And so how are we contributing or doing sort of like a surcharge to guests for housing justice that would then go into a fund, which actually the city's just started? And that's just one example of how we're, you know, holistically thinking about how our businesses will impact positively, and also how do we offset any potential downside of what we're proposing. This just talks about who we are. You know, we're kind of, what we think of Zeze as a collective of creative people who have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in across different fields. So hospitality, the arts, design, development, culture producers, food and beverage specifically, and of course development. And we really think of these as, you know, and this is, I think, a little bit different than how a lot of hospitality ventures start, where there's kind of one lead visionary and everything's filtered through their lens. And instead, what we've done is invert that and established our shared values first. And then every idea or every concept we're considering flows through in non-hierarchical fashions through our team, which is always growing and changing. That's it. Thanks.
Oh, terrific. Thank you so much, Sean and Gabriel, Alex, Ian. Yeah, well, Chris and I were really proud to.
I'm gonna unmute.
I am on, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, I think I'm unmuted.
I can hear you.
Okay, good. We're just really proud to be partnering with you and to be in this community where such tremendous entrepreneurs exist and people who care about the future, care about our impact. And I think it's interesting to hear you talk about not having thought about your project in a regenerative way, but then noticing, I love that slide where you show, okay, well, here were our themes, and then here are the themes of the regenerative economy. And, you know, I think I've also had a similar sort of appreciation since meeting Chris and learning more about regenerative economic principles and realizing that, actually, maybe blockchain and crypto is like impact investing, which something that, you know, we'll preview for all of you in future webinars. We'll talk more about the blockchain strategy and, you know, some of the ways that we think that new technologies can be an important part of the stack of solutions, and that particularly in the context of an opportunity zone fund, digital assets as, you know, being held within the structure owned by a business, and as well as being able as managers of that fund to support our portfolio companies and portfolio ventures in terms of strategy and integrating elements of that, whether it's from a financing perspective or even hospitality, you know, things that are happening socially through tokenization. And as Chris mentioned earlier, that, you know, the historic church property that he's purchased and developing as a recording studio and community space is adjacent to Pocketbook. And so we really see Regenerate Hudson, it's much bigger than an opportunity zone fund, but it's an invitation really to all types of people and investors and entrepreneurs and people in the community, our local representatives, and, you know, just really everyone who's here and everyone who kind of cares about the future and thinking how we can collaborate and work together, particularly on the issue of jobs, and appreciate, you know, and love to maybe open the discussion. You know, love to, Chris, have you give us what you're thinking about right now in the program, but, you know, creating new industries, and even, you know, Acre of America is a qualified opportunity zone business. You know, we're building an investment management firm right here in the Hudson Valley, creating career opportunities, and normally you probably have to live in Manhattan or Greenwich, Connecticut. So, you know, it sort of belatedly occurred to me that, oh, actually, you know, we're bringing some cool jobs to Hudson as well. But, you know, the issue of diversifying the career and business opportunities outside of sort of the tourism, which is really the primary driver, and really create, you know, diverse, you know, housing mix. You know, this is going to take a village, as the expression goes, and, you know, the Opportunity Zone Fund is one piece of the puzzle. But Chris, what are you thinking about as you see this mix of conversation that's been brought together through the fund that you started?
Well, it's beautiful to just see and witness some of the presentations of the early investments of Regenerative Hudson. It is, I feel, a good representation of where we want to go. I was really happy that Gabriel got to talk a little bit about pace and about, how he's incorporating renewable energy into the Pocketbook factory. It is a larger objective of mine to incorporate that type of programming into the Regenerative Hudson portfolio for other buildings and other homeowners to make it easier for people within Hudson to invest in upgrading their homes to green energy and energy efficiency. That is I think a core and essential objective for any kind of regenerative investment portfolio focusing on urban regeneration. I am also really interested in looking towards the future, looking for ventures that are involved in the circular economy. So specifically, how do we reduce waste? How do we start to deal with the massive waste problem that I think is pretty much universal for any urban environment? But one of the projects that I've been working on has been an anaerobic digester, a micro anaerobic digester that is now situated, lives right next to the basilica. I am hoping to gain more traction for that type of technology, for turning food waste, in this case, into a source of energy, and as well as a fertilizer that can be sold back to farms and gardens and landscapers. That is an example of closing a loop within a region and within a local area. So the food waste situation is it's a problem, but it's also an incredible opportunity to close a loop in Hudson and the surrounding area. Other areas are, of course, regenerative agriculture is, I think, also a central focus of just the whole idea of rebuilding or creating a regenerative economy. Food, how we grow food is right now a huge problem. It's a huge source of water pollution, of carbon emissions. Regenerative agriculture is really the antidote to the current extractive agricultural system. And so I'm proud of the work that my family has been doing in that space with Hudson Carbon, with Stonehouse Farm, Mud Creek Farm, Churchtown Dairy. We've been doing a lot of work to try to create examples of how agriculture can be regenerative, how it can sequester carbon into the soil, how it can grow healthier food for people, and how we can actually give back and regenerate whole ecosystems. So so I see that as being a cornerstone in this in this initiative. Those while it may not fit into the Opportunity Zone Fund, I do think that the portfolio of Regenerative Hudson OZ there are a lot of opportunities for the investments and the businesses to invest in regenerative to support regenerative agriculture, as we saw with Ferments, and so that's, I think, really critical. I imagine that there will be some really interesting partnerships between Pocketbook Factory and the restaurants there to support local regenerative farmers. And then also, of course, there's this emerging opportunity in the hemp and cannabis space, which is really exciting. It is, I think, a little bit blurry in terms of how that might fit into the opportunity zone, because opportunity zone investments do exclude, I believe, those questionable substances
in businesses.
Yeah, but right now, hemp and cannabis is clearly going to play a role in both agriculture, the revitalization of agriculture, but also
hempcrete, right? The building material.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that's the one of my, I think that's one of the things I'm most excited about right now is the whole area of building materials, using hemp for developing carbon negative building materials, textiles, clothing. All that is possible now to do here. And so I think in future, in the not too distant future, I am imagining that we will be getting involved with ventures that are looking at bringing light manufacturing back to Hudson, carbon negative building materials, textiles, clothing. I am really excited about partnering with the incubator that Eric DeFeo has been creating, Made X Hudson, where he's working with local fashion designers and clothing creators, manufacturers to bring fashion and textiles back into the regional economy, which has been, of course, outsourced to China for so long. But I think there's a real excitement and energy around this idea of bringing production, industrial production, back to our area and actually revitalizing some of the production that has been closed down, in which the Pocketbook Factory is kind of an example of. But there are opportunities for repurposing other buildings in the area to re-energize the light manufacturing and other forms of production within the city. So yeah, that's I suppose a good overview of where we're trying to go. And I don't know, do you have anything else to say, Kianga?
Anyone else have any thoughts to share at this point?
Yeah, I have one thing to add,
Yeah.
or just to add on with it. I think, some of the things that Chris is, talking about, they're so exciting to us because I think we need help in exploring. And generally, as I'm finding and meeting people who are engaged in whatever regenerative businesses or regenerative ventures, it's this need to really pool our energy to push things forward. And one of the great examples of that is things like, you were bringing up hempcrete, but we have an amazing designer on our team named Kina, and she's really into mycelium and the idea about using mycelium as an alternative kind of form to create walls and as an alternative to drywall, which is not efficient and very much non-sustainable. And so even when you look at the idea of using mycelium, that's great, but we need to look at is it, what's the fire rating? How do you legally build with it? There's this big lift of pushing against the grain, specifically when we're talking about physical building and things that interact with fire codes and assembly codes. And so the more there is a collective push to not only research and experiment with these things, but to make it clear to the people around us that it is a movement and it is a group of people that are really interested in that, it goes a really long way. And there are some great resources already out there, and hopefully we can work to localize some of them in Hudson. That was it.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, I was just going to, I know you've been doing a lot of work in reviving the local grain economy, and maybe you, and also I'd love Ian to comment on the supply chain, kind of the local food supply chain, and what some of the challenges are that you're seeing in your work as an investor, and also Ian as an operator of a business that's depending on this entire flow from the farmer to the end consumer, and how you think opportunity zone investing or other forms of investment and other types of investment partners can work together to address those issues.
Yeah, thanks, Kanga. I think it's regional scaled food infrastructure. It has sort of disappeared. And so in order to support smallholder farms, we need to build back this infrastructure and the skill sets and the crafts that are, whether it's butchery or milling or fermenting foods, to support the farms. And grains is an interesting one because given the price of land here and the relative productivity on a dollar standpoint of land, it's better used towards vegetables, but grains are a really interesting component as it relates to a rotation, which is a crucial component of regenerative farming. Is how to use the crops and the produce to regenerate the soil as opposed to added inputs. And most of the grain farming regionally goes to feed for animals. And because the market is quite strong, there's a big need for it. It pays well and it's less work. Because you don't have to clean the grain as much. There's less attention to detail. You're not as worried about the quality with bacteria and funguses and all of that. So grains have become kind of a central part of the work that our farm is doing in small grains. And we've been moving towards food grade small grain production, and realizing that there's sort of you have to build the market at the same time that you need to build the production capacity regionally. So you have to get the farmers to commit to it, and then you also need to make sure that there's a market that can absorb that at a price that makes sense for the farmers. So a lot of our work has been around trying to coordinate this value chain at kind of this mid-tier scale, so that everyone benefits. And there, I mentioned something earlier in a message that was about being intentionally low profit. And I really believe that we sort of, those of us who probably have enough, and it needs to be, we need to consider, farmers, put them at the center of the equation. And most farmers in the United States, the median income is actually negative. So how does that make sense? It's kind of the center. I mean, food is what keeps us alive, and it's such an important part of our lives. And so thinking about how to reorganize and rebuild systems that actually make sense for farmers and for consumers and for the environment. And so grains is one part of that, but vegetables is another huge part of that I'll pass it off to Ian to talk about.
Yeah, and I'll maybe flip it a bit and say that I'm really proud of Farm Ferments in terms of where it sits within this market, because we're an alternative purchaser really for farms in the area that have historically really focused on CSA and retail. And so you can imagine that a regenerative farmer isn't using the types of practices that, pump out very uniform product. And the market, meaning the retail market, really wants to see kind of that perfect uniform fruit or vegetable. And we occupy a space where we can take in most things, right? And so we've engineered our plant to be able to handle large cabbage, small cabbage, funky carrots, anything you can think of, we can process, and that large cabbage or that deformed piece of produce that would normally get tilled under finds a home here. And we do our best really to make sure that we're available for the farmers in that way. And so as an organization, we are a bit of a hub in that respect. That said, we could use more infrastructure in our area, having to do with produce handling. It's not efficient for one facility to buy all the types of equipment that are required to, for instance, top and tail a carrot. There's opportunity perhaps for a hub that is really dedicated to handling and essentially processing the vegetables that grow most readily in our region.
We've got about 4 more minutes. We could only scratch the surface. There's like so much in the hopper, in the lab, in the sandbox. And we're excited with Regenerate Hudson at Acre of America as an investment manager and advisor to help investors think about how to make impact investments. What are different vehicles, maybe how to leverage new decentralized financial platforms, DeFi, and at a community level, how do some of these peer-to-peer technologies maybe provide new paths to ownership? Chris, we've talked a lot about the banking system, the monetary system, and capital, and kind of how a program like, say, the Opportunity Zone program creates these incentives, but at the end of the day, it's the people who had capital at the beginning who are better off at the end of it. And what happens to the people who made it an interesting place to invest in, the people who live and work and contribute their lives that those investments rest on. And so what are the mechanisms or products, or, we're banging our heads and we're working really hard on this, and we want to be good neighbors and to really connect and hear from all the people in Hudson and in the Hudson Valley region and learn and listen and recognize that, we have many thousands of years of history of people coming to this place and creating, displacing and creating new technologies. I mean, we have a complex legacy and shoulders that we're standing on. And so, part of what we really couldn't get into today with Regenerate Hudson is also to acknowledge all of those histories and all of the people and cultures who have been here and built and lost, and that whole kind of process that has been unfolding, but to think about how we can come together and look toward the future and all build a future that, we will all be proud to say we were part of regenerating at this moment in time. So I think on that note, I'll say thank you to everyone on the panel for participating today, and thank all of you who have joined us today. And I think we'll try to keep doing this like every quarter and communicate and talk more about the work of the fund and other things that will fall into the Regenerate Hudson umbrella.
And thank you, Kianga, for bringing your tremendous energy and expertise to this space. It's great to have a partner like you.
Thank you. So exciting.
Yes. Thank you, Kianga. And thank you to all the panelists for making this time. I'd also like to thank Laura Nicoletti, who's been an amazing participant in the Hudson Regenerative Hudson team. She's just been so incredibly helpful. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing these type of webinars and building these connections and partnerships. So,
All right.
thank you, everyone.
Happy Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.